Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be, exploring this really cool intersection of faith and gardening,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll be, taking a deep dive into a podcast episode called "From the Ground Up: Growing Faith and Food in Yahweh's Creation."
Mm.
And I got to say, the more I've been looking into this, the more I'm seeing like gardening
Yeah.
is having this kind of resurgence, and it's not just like a hobby.
Right.
People are really looking for something deeper.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual hunger
Yeah.
almost, but manifesting in this really practical way.
Yeah, totally.
And this podcast really leans into that. It presents gardening as more than just a way to get like fresh tomatoes, like a way to connect with the creator, with Yahweh.
Yeah, and that's something that really resonated with me when I was, listening to the podcast, especially like the way it uses scripture.
Yeah.
I mean, Genesis 2.15, like that popped right into my head.
Right.
God literally put Adam in the Garden of Eden to care for it, right? That's not just a suggestion. It's like the original job description.
It sets the tone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This idea that interacting with the earth, cultivating it, is like part of our, divinely ordained purpose.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it that way. Like something we just consider a hobby
Right.
actually has these deep theological roots.
Yeah, and it goes even deeper, like they even compare soil to the human heart,
Right.
which is a really powerful image. And they bring up the parable of the sower
Yes.
from Matthew 13.23.
Mm-hmm.
The one where like the seed needs good soil to thrive.
Exactly.
And that got me thinking, like I never thought about weeding my heart before. But
That's a good point.
that's a powerful image.
It really makes you think about what kind of gardener you are,
Yeah.
both in the physical and spiritual sense. Are we cultivating a fertile ground for faith to grow?
Mm.
Or are we letting weeds choke out what could be something beautiful?
Okay, but here's where my brain went next.
Okay.
If caring for the garden is this like sacred duty,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean every tomato plant that wilts
Right.
is like a spiritual failing?
Yeah.
That feels like a lot of pressure,
Yeah,
especially
that's-
for someone like me whose basil barely survives August.
Yeah, well, that's where I think understanding Yahweh's concern for the land comes in.
Oh.
The podcast talks about Leviticus 25.3-4 and this idea of the Sabbath year for the land, letting the earth rest every seventh year.
Right.
So maybe it's not just about our output,
Yeah.
but about working with the natural rhythms.
So maybe a wilted tomato plant is less about my gardening skills
Mm-hmm.
and more about respecting the natural cycles of growth and rest.
Yeah.
Okay, that's reassuring, honestly.
Exactly so.
It's like even the ancient practices acknowledge that sometimes things just don't work out.
Exactly. And, this ties into what the podcast observes about modern trends, too.
Okay.
This whole resurgence of gardening. It's not just about, pretty flowers. It's linked to, food security concerns, desire for healthier lifestyles, longing for sustainability. I mean, these are anxieties that are rooted in the very things we're talking about.
Right.
Our relationship with the earth and our role in caring for it.
So maybe all these like hipsters growing kale in their apartments are onto something.
Maybe.
It's like a subconscious pull towards those ancient rhythms and responsibilities.
Could be.
Even the podcast acknowledges the practicality of starting small.
Right?
You talk about container gardening, composting,
Mm-hmm.
things that anyone can do, even in a tiny urban space.
Right. And it's not just about the how of gardening. It's about connecting those actions to something bigger, like composting, for instance. It's not just practical. It mirrors this natural cycle of death and rebirth,
Right.
turning what we might consider waste into something that nourishes new life.
Yeah, it's like we're coming full circle back to Genesis, to that image of Adam in the garden. But instead of, one perfect Eden, we're finding ways to cultivate little pockets of it,
Yeah.
even in the middle of a concrete jungle.
And you know what I really appreciated? The podcast doesn't just stay super high level. They actually get into specifics about plants,
Okay.
It really gets me excited about the possibilities.
Uh-huh.
Like, they talk about the simple satisfaction of growing herbs. Basil, mint, rosemary.
Yeah.
Things that smell amazing and, can really elevate even the simplest meal.
Right. It's like adding a touch of Eden to your windowsill.
Exactly.
And they go beyond just the like basics too. They were talking about microgreens, edible flowers.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like practical, but with this dash of artistry.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole concept so compelling. It's not about rejecting modern life. It's about finding ways to like weave those ancient rhythms and wisdom into our current reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, even those trendy heirloom varieties speak to this. It's like we're rediscovering the value in what's been passed down, you know?
This whole conversation is really making me rethink what it even means to grow in faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not just about reading scripture or going to church.
Right.
It's about actively cultivating those virtues, tending to our spiritual soil, so to speak.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And the podcast touches on that, too. They talk about how gardening teaches us patience, persistence, resilience, qualities that are, essential for spiritual growth as well.
Right.
Like, we don't expect a plant to bloom overnight, so why do we expect instant transformation in ourselves?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
And just like a gardener has to, prune back overgrown branches to encourage new growth,
Yes.
Sometimes we need to let go of old habits or beliefs that are no longer serving us.
Absolutely.
It's about creating space for something new to emerge.
It really is. It makes you consider the fruits we're bearing in our own lives. Are we producing kindness, generosity, compassion? Or are we letting those qualities wither on the vine?
Yeah.
The podcast really challenges us to look at that connection between our inner landscape and our outward actions.
And it made me think about how we tend to are spiritual gardens too.
Yeah.
Prayer, meditation, studying scripture.
Right.
These are all ways to nourish our faith and help it flourish.
They really are.
It's about being intentional, making choices that create a fertile ground for growth.
And just like a gardener has to choose the right plants for their specific climate,
Yeah.
we have to find what works for us spiritually.
Right.
It's a personal journey.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
And, this whole concept of stewardship really resonated with me. And the podcast extends it beyond just the land, talking about our talents, resources, time. Everything we've been given is a gift.
It is.
It's about using those gifts responsibly. Not out of obligation, but out of gratitude for what we've been given.
Especially in our current culture of consumerism.
Right.
Where we're constantly told we need more.
Yeah.
Gardening teaches us to find contentment in what we have, to appreciate the simple things, to slow down and savor that process of growth.
And it's not just about personal growth either.
Right.
The podcast highlights this communal aspect of gardening too.
Yeah.
Sharing our bounty with others, whether it's fresh produce or just knowledge. It's a beautiful way to connect with our communities and live out our faith.
Absolutely. Think about community gardens or even just sharing extra zucchini with your neighbor.
Right.
It's a tangible way to build relationships and foster a sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah, it's like we're weaving those threads of faith and community into the very fabric of our lives.
I love that. That's beautiful.
And there's also this element of creativity that the podcast touches on.
Oh.
Like designing a garden, even a small one, is an act of creation. It's about using our imagination, working with the limitations of our space, and finding beauty in unexpected places.
I love that connection. It's like we're co-creating with Yahweh, adding our own unique touch to the tapestry of creation. And sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
A wildflower pushing through a crack in the sidewalk.
Right.
A tomato plant thriving in a repurposed container.
Yeah, it's a beautiful reminder that even in the midst of imperfection, even in the most unexpected places, life finds a way.
It really does.
And that's something worth celebrating, both in the garden and in our own lives. I feel like we've gone so much deeper than just gardening tips,
Yeah, totally.
It's like rediscovering this ancient practice, this connection to something deeper, something kind of sacred even.
It really is, and it's so timely, don't you think?
Yeah.
In a world facing so much uncertainty, climate anxiety, disconnection, all of that.
Yeah.
Gardening offers this tangible way to ground ourselves, to feel empowered, to connect with nature,
Yeah.
Even to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Totally. And there's something so hopeful about it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Even the smallest seed, planted with intention has this potential for growth and transformation.
It's amazing.
It's this reminder that even in the midst of chaos, life finds a way.
It does.
And I think that's something that's really important to remember, especially right now.
Yeah, for sure.
And the best part is it's accessible to everyone.
Totally.
It doesn't matter where you live, how much space you have. A sprawling backyard garden, a few herbs on a windowsill.
Right.
Even just, tending a houseplant with care.
Exactly.
There are so many ways to participate in this ancient practice.
So true. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a little challenge, dear listener.
Okay, I like it.
How can you cultivate your own little Eden?
Ooh.
How can you connect with those rhythms of creation and find that sense of peace and purpose that comes from tending to something, watching it grow, sharing its bounty with others?
Yeah, maybe it's starting that herb garden you've been thinking about.
Right.
Or volunteering at a community garden.
Yeah.
Or even just spending more time appreciating the natural world around you.
Absolutely.
Whatever it looks like for you, I hope that this deep dive has inspired you to find joy, connection, and maybe even a renewed sense of faith in the simple act of tending the earth.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And remember, just as a garden flourishes with care and attention, so too do our hearts and souls.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating topic.